You wake up on the morning, the sky goes dark. Not night, not storm. Something else. A stillness before it. Then the ground trembles beneath your feet, a low vibration you feel in your teeth before you hear it. And then the horizon to the south becomes a wall of ash so tall it swallows the sun entirely. You do not know what a supervolcano is. You do not have a word for it. You only know that for the next several years, the world will be dimmer, colder, quieter, and your group, already small, already living on the edge of what this landscape can provide, is about to get smaller. This is roughly 74,000 years ago. You are a modern human, anatomically identical to people alive today, and your entire species is about to be reduced to a number so small it barely registers. A population that could fit inside a single sports stadium, maybe smaller. The human story comes within a breath of ending here. Or so the story goes. Because here is the first thing you need to understand about humanity's closest brush with extinction. The version you have probably heard may be entirely wrong. The volcano is real. The eruption is real. The crisis in the human fossil record is real. But the chain of cause and effect that links them, the idea that Toba's eruption nearly wiped us out, has been quietly falling apart for years. And behind that crumbling story is something far stranger and far more unsettling. A real extinction event, a bottleneck so severe it makes the Toba narrative look mild, and a cause that to this day no scientist can explain. So, let us go back, all the way back, because the real near death of your species did not happen 74,000 years ago. It happened 900,000 years ago, and whatever caused it remains one of the deepest unsolved mysteries in the entire history of the human species. In 2023, a team of researchers led by Haipeng Li and Giorgio Manzi published a paper in the journal Science. They had developed a new genomic method called Fit-Col Fast Infinitesimal Time Coalescent, which allowed them to reconstruct ancient population sizes by reading the patterns of genetic diversity buried inside modern human DNA. What they found stopped the field cold. Between approximately 930,000 and 813,000 years ago, the ancestors of every human alive today passed through a population bottleneck of staggering severity. The breeding population, the number of individuals actually reproducing and passing genes forward, collapsed to roughly 1,280 individuals. Not total humans. Breeding individuals. Total population may have been somewhat higher, but not by enough to matter. Based on the team's estimates, something like 98.7% of your ancestors died. The bottleneck lasted 117,000 years. That is longer than modern Homo sapiens have existed as a species. For over 100,000 years, humanity's entire future rested on the genetics of a group smaller than most villages. Haipeng Li described it simply. The ancestors of all humans today were reduced to a tiny group that survived together and rebuilt the population over time. What makes this discovery staggering is not just the scale of the collapse. It is that we have no idea what caused it. No volcanic eruption of that magnitude has been confirmed at that time. No asteroid impact, no single dramatic geological event. The leading hypotheses involve long-term climate deterioration, a transition between ice ages that dried out vast regions of Africa, collapsing the ecosystems that human ancestors depended on. But the honest answer is that nobody knows. The event that nearly ended your species is at this point a ghost in the genome with no confirmed identity. So why does everyone talk about Toba? Because Toba is spectacular. Because Toba is comprehensible. Because Toba left its fingerprints across the entire planet and gave scientists something to point to. The Toba supervolcano sits beneath what is now Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia. When it erupted approximately 74,000 years ago, it did so on a scale that makes every other eruption in recorded human history look like a backyard bonfire. It was the most powerful volcanic eruption of the last 2.5 million years. By raw volume of ejected material, it was more than 215 times larger than the 20th century's biggest eruption. It was more than 11,000 times the size of the 1980 Mount St. Helens blast. Krakatoa in 1883 killed 36,000 people and disrupted global temperatures for years. Toba was over 100 times larger than Krakatoa. The ash cloud it produced traveled across the Indian Ocean and blanketed parts of South Asia in deposits up to several meters thick. The sulfur it injected into the stratosphere would have triggered a volcanic winter lasting years, a sudden sustained drop in global temperatures that would have devastated plant life, collapsed food chains, and put every large animal on the planet under extreme stress. Multiple species did go extinct around this time. The fossil record shows disruption, and human populations already small and scattered across Africa were clearly affected. This is where the Toba catastrophe hypothesis was born. In 1998, the scientist Stanley Ambrose proposed that the Toba eruption had reduced the human population to somewhere between 2,000 and 10,000 individuals, creating the genetic bottleneck visible in modern human DNA. The timing seemed to fit. The mechanism seemed plausible. The story was clean. And for years it was taught as established science. But the evidence kept arriving, and it kept failing to cooperate. At a site called Jwalapuram in southern India, researchers discovered something that fundamentally complicated the narrative. In layers of sediment surrounding a thick, unmistakable deposit of Toba ash, they found stone tools, Middle Paleolithic tools, consistent with modern human or closely related populations. The tools appeared both below the ash layer and above it. The same tool-making tradition continuing through the eruption. Someone had lived through it. At Lida Ajur in Sumatra, close to the eruption site itself, close enough that survival should have been essentially impossible. Human teeth have been dated to between 73,000 and 63,000 years ago. People were living in a closed canopy rainforest near the epicenter of the most powerful volcanic event in millions of years, and they kept living there. And then, in 2024, came the discovery that reframed everything again. At a site called Shinfa Metema, one in Ethiopia, a research team led by John Kappelman uncovered something extraordinary inside sediment layers dating to approximately 74,000 years ago, directly coinciding with the Toba eruption. Small symmetrical triangular stone points, carefully shaped, precisely balanced. The analysis concluded that these were arrowheads, the oldest evidence of archery ever found. At 74,000 years old, they predate the next oldest evidence of bow and arrow technology by tens of thousands of years. What had happened? Kappelman's team proposed a scenario that is almost poetic in its logic. The eruption changed the climate, making conditions more arid. Rivers shrank. Water became concentrated in smaller and smaller pools. But those shrinking waterholes were trapping something else: fish. Suddenly, in places where land animals had been the primary food source, the water was full of protein. The humans at Shinfa Metema adapted. They shifted to a fish-heavy diet. They developed new tools to hunt and process aquatic prey. And somewhere in that adaptation, that pressure, that ingenuity, they invented archery. Catastrophe did not extinguish the human mind. It sharpened it. And then Kappelman offered one more idea, one that ties the entire extinction narrative to its opposite. The climatic disruption caused by Toba had produced longer dry seasons, concentrating resources at waterholes along seasonal rivers. As human populations depleted those resources, they moved from waterhole to waterhole, following the rivers pushed outward by necessity. Those rivers, Kappelman argued, functioned as pumps, drawing populations outward along their channels, driving dispersal. The volcano that came closest to killing us may have been the engine that drove our species out of Africa and across the planet. But you cannot tell this story without asking the question that makes it strange. If the Toba eruption was so powerful, why did Neanderthals appear completely unaffected? Neanderthals had been living in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, surviving ice ages that would have annihilated any modern human population. Their cold adaptation was deep, physiological, and behavioral. A volcanic winter was not a novel catastrophe. For a Neanderthal, it was an intensified version of conditions they had already evolved to handle. Their latest presence in the fossil record dates to around 40,000 years ago. Denisovans, another closely related lineage, persisted until approximately 55,000 years ago. Both groups sailed through the Toba event without any obvious population collapse. The species that nearly vanished was the one already living in the warmest, most biologically productive environments on Earth, not the cold adapted ones, the tropical ones. And that points toward something important. Because the survival of the human lineage through this period, through whatever killed 98.7% of your ancestors 900,000 years ago, and through Toba, and through whatever climate instability linked them, was not simply a matter of endurance. It was a matter of behavior. The anthropologist Richard Wrangham has spent decades studying the social structures of great apes and early humans. He and others have argued that a critical difference between Homo sapiens and other Homo lineages was the development of cooperative intergroup social networks, the capacity not just to live in groups, but to build relationships between groups, to trade, to share information, to call on distant allies in hard times. This is not something chimpanzees do easily. It is not something Neanderthals appear to have done at all. The archaeological record for Neanderthals shows strong evidence of localized tool-making traditions and limited long-distance exchange. Their social world was tight-bounded and largely closed. During the periods of genuine stress 900,000 years ago, and again around Toba, those intergroup networks may have been the deciding factor. When a local environment collapsed, a species that could fall back on distant relationships, that could migrate toward known allies, that could share resources across group boundaries, had options that a purely local creature did not. The humans that survived near extinction may have survived precisely because they were better at trusting strangers. It is a strange thought. But consider what was being selected for over those 117,000 years of collapse, over those generations of life at the very edge. Every individual who survived had to cooperate. Every group that endured had to extend itself outward. The genetic bottleneck was not just a filter for physical survival. It may have been a filter for social intelligence. The people on the other side of the Great Dying were by definition the ones who had figured out how to be human, in the deepest sense, not just to survive, but to trust, to cooperate, to build something larger than a single group. And we know the eruption happened. We can trace it, because the ash Toba released, much of it invisible to the naked eye, was made of microscopic shards of volcanic glass. Scientists call this material cryptotephra. These particles are too small to see without magnification, but they carry a distinct chemical signature, a fingerprint locked into their molecular structure that cannot be faked or mistaken. Volcanologists have found cryptotephra from the Toba eruption, embedded in ancient sediments across Africa, across South Asia, across the Middle East. Those glass shards drifting silently across continents 74,000 years ago have become the primary tool for reconstructing exactly when and where Toba's effects were felt. A ghost trail of glass, invisible in its time, has allowed us to read the crisis. So where does this leave us? The genetic bottleneck in human DNA is real. The near extinction of your ancestors happened. But the Toba eruption almost certainly did not cause it. The real population collapse, the one that reduced your ancestors to 1,280 breeding individuals, happened 900,000 years ago, predating Toba by over 800,000 years. And as the paleoenvironmental data and the archaeological evidence continue to accumulate, the specific claim that Toba dramatically reduced human populations has become harder and harder to support. As researchers like Michael Petraglia, who has studied the Jwalapuram site extensively, have noted, the archaeological evidence consistently shows continuity through the Toba event, not collapse. The story of a post-Toba population crash does not fit what the ground is actually telling us. What Toba may have done is different and more interesting. It may have intensified a selection process already underway. It may have pushed already stressed populations into new adaptive behaviors. It may have been the pressure that produced archery, the pressure that initiated dispersal, the crucible in which modern human cognition was sharpened into something unprecedented. But the extinction event, the one that actually almost ended you, that was earlier, much earlier, and we still do not know what caused it. You wake up on a morning 900,000 years ago, somewhere in Africa. You are not fully modern, not yet, but you carry within you something that will one day become the entire human species. Your group is very small. The land is hard. Something has gone wrong with the world, the climate, the ecosystem, the food supply, and you cannot know if the hardship will end or if this is simply how it will be from now on. Most of your kind are already gone. Those who remain are people who found each other, who shared what they had, who built something out of reciprocity and trust. For 117,000 years, your descendants will hold on. And eventually, somehow, the world will turn. The numbers will grow. The population will recover. Language will sharpen. Cooperation will deepen. And roughly 800,000 years after the bottleneck closes, a volcano will erupt on the other side of the world, fill the sky with ash, and give the survivors a reason to invent the bow and arrow, to eat fish in rivers going dry, to move toward the horizon. That horizon will eventually become every continent on Earth, every human civilization, every city, every idea anyone has ever had. It all passed through a group of 1,280 people in a crisis no one saw coming for reasons no one yet understands. And that is the morning you woke up inside.